right, if you go ahead and grab your slice of pizza and pop, we'll go ahead and get started. My name's Gordon Clayton. I'm director of the Thomas S. Foley Institute here at WSU, and on behalf of the Institute, I want to welcome you out to our event today. We're fortunate to have with us Mary Beth Tinker. Mary Beth was born in 1952 and grew up in Des Moines, Iowa. In 1965, she felt very strongly about the news coming from Vietnam, and so she and her siblings and a number of other students decided to wear black armbands to their public school in order to mourn the dead on both sides of the war. The Des Moines School Board tried to block the students from wearing armbands, and most of the students who participated, in fact, were suspended. Their case eventually wound up in the U.S. Supreme Court, and the court handed down a landmark decision in 1969 that students in public schools have First Amendment rights to expressive activity. Writing for the court, Justice Abe Fortas wrote that students and teachers do not shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate. Mary Beth is currently a pediatric nurse with master's degrees in both public health and nursing. As an advocate for the rights of youth, she continues to educate young people about their rights, particularly in the areas of health and education. I'm going to turn the time over now to Mary Beth. She's going to speak for about half an hour and then open up for Q&A after that. And then I'll tell you about an upcoming event this evening, which she'll be speaking at the end of her speech as well. Mary Beth.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you. It's so good to be here with all of you. Thank you for inviting me. Is this on? Am I wired? Okay, so good. Well, we're just going to make this very informal and have some fun, and we'll tell you about our Tinker Tour. Mike Easton, this is Mike, from the Student Press Law Center, which is a group that stands up for student journalism rights. Sound like a good idea? Where's all you journalists? Yeah. And so we have been traveling around the country, talking to students, talking to teachers, community members all over the country. We started off on Constitution Day, September 17th, at the Constitution Center in Philadelphia. And we've been traveling in our First Amendment van. Well, we're on our second one now. We had to downsize a little bit because it was so environmentally wasteful. But regardless, that's another subject. So now we're saving the environment and the Constitution. And we've been to 41 states. We figured out 41 states. All right, and talking to students all over. It's really been wonderful. We decided that this is a time, a lot like the time that I grew up in, actually, where there are great issues that young people should be speaking up about and are speaking up about. Issues like the growing inequality, economic inequality in our country, and that's not good for democracy. And racial discrimination, which we have plenty of. War and a war economy. This is the kind of time that I grew up in the 1950s and 60s. And so we wanted to just give a little bit of a shot in the arm to young people and encourage young people and also hear the stories from so many young people. We're collecting stories as we travel around from students and others who are speaking up and standing up about so many different things around the country. And I know that's some of you as well. I was reading some in the newspaper this morning. So as we travel around, we're just thinking about all of the young people now, but also through history, who have made a difference in our country and in our world by using their rights and expressing themselves and taking action. And as it turns out, that's something that young people are especially good at. As a nurse, I see this firsthand. So we are just really encouraged to see all of the things going on in our country with people taking the democracy to a better place. I grew up in the late 1950s and 60s, and my father was a Methodist preacher. But in church, we would hear about Jesus' love, and at Christmas time, we would light the Yule candles, and my dad would teach us about the promise of the birth of Christ and the message of forgiveness. But then when we turned on the TV, we didn't see a message of forgiveness. On TV, we saw war. bombing, children running from their huts, screaming in terror as the Vietnam War built up. And that Christmas, 1965, when I was just turning 13 years old, there had been about 1,000 soldiers killed by then, U.S. soldiers, and already thousands of Vietnamese. Well, as young people all through history have, we wanted peace. And we saw this on TV, and we wanted to express ourselves because it's a natural human drive to express yourself. And we wanted to do that also. And so I didn't really know what to do. I was a shy girl, and I was, young. I was in 8th grade. But luckily, some of the older kids, like my brother John, he was always the bright one, the bright guy. He came up with a bright idea. And his friend Chris Eckhart and a few other kids. By this time, we were Quakers. We had been Methodists for many years, but we became Quakers, and that's another story. But and so the Quaker youth group, my brother John was involved with that, and then the Unitarian youth group, Chris Eckhart and some of the other kids were involved at Roosevelt High School. And thank you so much to Beth Hindman for arranging all of this, too. And so they came up with this idea. Why don't we just wear black armbands to school, and this will be our message, to say that we are mourning for the dead on both sides of the war, which is one thing that made it very controversial. And also that we are supporting a Christmas truce this Christmas that was proposed by Robert Kennedy. Some children, like us, were experiencing the war by seeing it on TV and knowing that the kids in the neighborhood were being drafted, and my brother John was of the draft age very soon to be. Other children experienced it very directly, like Mike, whose uncle went off to war around that time and was killed, and whose father then went off to war in Vietnam. It's one of Mike's very first memories when his father flew over in a fighter jet off to war. Thankfully, his father came home. But yes, as children all over the world, we were affected by war very much, and we wanted to do something about it. And so they came up with this great idea. Let's wear these black armbands to school. Well, they said, come on, Beth. That's what they called me. Beth. Come on, you can do it too. And I thought, I don't know. I'm so shy. I'm not sure about all this idea. And I didn't think I would do it. But man, I was thinking about it because I had examples in my life of other brave people, and I can tell you about some of those also. Well, the problem was then, especially I wasn't sure if I should do it because 2 days before we were going to wear the armbands to school, the principals heard about our plan. We weren't really trying to keep it a secret, but one of the boys at Roosevelt High School, Ross Peterson, wrote an article for the high school newspaper about our plans. And so the principals found out, and they had this hasty meeting with all of the Des Moines principals and made a ban on armbands. Yeah, it came out in the Des Moines Register that any student wearing an armband would be suspended. That's how we found out. It was right before we were going to wear the armbands. On December 16th was our day for our little action, which I was still thinking about. Then they came out with this rule against armbands. Then I really didn't know what to do. It was a real dilemma. Because I was a good student, and I had never gotten in trouble. And I didn't really want to get in trouble. But then on the other hand, I had examples of people who stand up and speak up for what they believe in. And so in the end, I decided I would try to, make my stand as well and be brave like these other people. So I put on my armband. I was very nervous and scared. I was in 8th grade. I was 13. And I went off to school, and my friend Connie said, you better take off that armband. You're going to get in trouble. And I said, but Connie, I want to speak up about the war, and I'm upset about the war and everything. She said, well, you better watch out. Little by little, I was gaining my confidence as other kids were asking me, why are you wearing that armband? I explained. And then the boys at lunch, at the boys' table, they started sort of teasing me, which they always did anyway, so I just ignored them, as always. And then when I got to my math class, Mr. Moberly's class, there was Mr. Moberly standing at the door of math class with a pink slip in his hand, sending me to the office and saying, I told you yesterday not to wear armbands, and it was going to be against the rules. And I said, okay, Mr. Moberly. I took my pink slip and I walked down to the office very, very slowly. My heart was beating. I was so scared. And I got down there, and Mrs. Tarman, the girls' advisor, said, now, sit down, Mary Beth, and you know you're not supposed to be wearing armbands. I'm surprised at you. You're a good student. She said, now take off that armband and go back to class. I looked around the office. I looked at Mrs. Tarman, and in a stand of courage and conviction, I said, okay, Mrs. Tarman, here you go. And I put it on her desk, and I thought, oh, boy, that's the end of that. Well, it wasn't the end of that, as you can see, because she said, you know, I've been thinking about it. Since you broke the rules, you're going to be suspended anyway. And so she gave me my suspension papers, but she also gave me a lifetime of being able to tell kids how a shy girl from Iowa with a little tiny ounce of courage can make a difference. I took my suspension papers. I walked home. I wasn't sure what my dad would think. He was against us wearing the armbands because it was against the rules. I wasn't sure what my mom would think. But you see, young people have another wonderful quality, persuasiveness. Yeah. And so the next day when my brother John got suspended and Chris Eckhart got suspended from Roosevelt and a few other kids from Roosevelt, North High School, I was at Harding Junior High School. It really would have been the end of the whole thing, except for a group called the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. And they came and offered a lawyer. And they said, but first you have to try to negotiate. So we did. We went to the school board and tried to change their mind. And the school board meeting was packed. Hundreds of people came and spoke on both sides of the issue. And two of the school board members did vote for us, saying that we hadn't disturbed anyone and we were just expressing ourselves. But they were outvoted. And so the case went to court. I continued with my very ordinary life of going roller skating on the weekends, studying for my math tests, being a good student, and going to slumber parties. But we were also involved in a few other things, standing up against racial injustice, picketing at the Capitol building for fair housing, which my parents had gotten involved with. And, of course, the war kept escalating. And as we know, eventually there were 58,000 soldiers killed. But the war kept escalating. In 1968, we went to the appeals court. And then in 1960, it was appealed to the, when we lost at the appeals court and lost at the district court, it was appealed to the Supreme Court. And we were so happy they took the case because they only take a very, very few cases. When I was a junior in high school then, in 1969, the court ruled by 7-2 that neither students or teachers leave their rights, their constitutional right to express themselves at the schoolhouse gate. And Abe Fortas, who wrote the opinion, said that students are persons under our Constitution with the rights and responsibilities of persons, and that schools should not be enclaves of totalitarianism, and that, yes, some speech will make some people uncomfortable, but that's a price we're willing to pay in our democracy. The court also said that students cannot disrupt school. The speech will be allowed as long as the speech is not substantially disruptive of school or impinging on the rights of others. And of course, that was a very gray area left open for interpretation from then on. But it was a very big victory for students all over the country. I had no idea how significant it was. I went on, grew up, went to nursing school. One day I was studying for my nursing school exams, and I saw our case in my nursing textbook. That's when it started to slowly dawn on me. This is kind of important, this case. I mean, I already kind of knew. I mean, Supreme Court, yeah. But then I started to see that Nurses need to know about children's rights and teenagers' rights. And I started to see this in the larger context of a human rights issue, and that this is an international issue. I met lawyers and law students and teachers and principals who were learning about this case, and journalists. And I was working then, when I graduated from nursing school, with children, mostly and teenagers. And I started to think, you know, these kids really need to start standing up for their rights. They're not really having a great deal in our society. Their well-being is not our top priority in our society. And so I said, these kids need to start speaking up for themselves. And I thought, what is there that I can tell them about that might encourage them to stand up for themselves? And I remembered this case right in my own experience. And so I started speaking with students more and telling them about not only our case, but examples of children all through history who have been speaking up and standing up to make a difference. And I can tell them about Claudette Colvin, for example, who was 15 years old a year before Rosa Parks. And she did the same exact thing Rosa Parks did 1 year earlier. She got handcuffed, dragged off the bus. She said her history teachers had taught her about her rights. And the NAACP found Claudette after she did that, and they said, Claudette, you're kind of an activist. We like you. Why don't you join our youth group? They're in Montgomery, Alabama. And she said, okay, I think I will join the youth. Guess who was the head of the youth group? Rosa Parks. 1 year later, Rosa Parks did her action. So I like to tell kids stories about other young people who are speaking up and standing up. And in the last day or two, we were at Boise at the Anne Frank Memorial, talking with kids about the example, some of the international examples like Anne Frank. And the kids then were telling us their projects, what they're doing to speak up and stand up. Some kids at one of the high schools found that some of the students are feeling kind of isolated at lunchtime with nothing to do, and they're all alone. And so the kids started getting together and forming their plan, and they have a whole plan now at lunchtime, how they include kids in all different kinds of activities to make a better world. They're using their rights to express themselves, assemble, and they're writing about this project. So thank you all for having us here today. It's really wonderful to be here, and I'm so excited about all the wonderful things you're doing here to promote democracy, the Constitution, the First Amendment. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now I think we'll just open it up for a free-for-all discussion and questions. Yes? Yes.
Hi. Thanks for being here. I teach this case when I teach civil liberties.
You did?
Students think it's a very important right, but I find that they often treat the decision as self-evident. Something like, of course, the Supreme Court's going to
Of course.
So I think it's great that you're here. But I have two questions. First, given your unique experience, are there any subsequent activities or issues to which the First Amendment has been extended that you find questionable? So, flag burning, cross burning, the recent campaign finance decisions. And my second question is also, do you still support the black band?
Do I still support it?
Do you still wear it?
Never leave home without your armband. That's my motto. You never know when you might have something. But yeah, the flag burning case, Johnson, I mean, that was kind of a no-brainer too, because as they argued in court, you're going to have these little flags that go on cupcakes for the 4th of July, and what, if you can't burn the flag, you can't even throw those things away. What about when your American flag sequin T-shirt gets ripped? You can't ever throw it away. So that was kind of a done deal, I think. What were some of the other ones? The interesting controversies? Expanding to the cross-burning. Yeah, well, the cross-burning and the hate speech is always where the question mark comes up when you're interpreting these things. That's why I tell kids, and Mike does too, that human beings are interpreting all of these decisions and our Constitution. It's not like you can just plug it into your computer and see how it's going to come out. These are human beings who are figuring all this out, so they should jump in there and be part of the discussion. But where it does kind of get really touchy is with hate speech, of course. But the Supreme Court has ruled that, for example, Phelps, the minister who was going to these funerals and saying God hates fags and that's why your Marine soldier has been killed, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of his speech. And then there's the very controversial, Citizens United, and the one that just came down a few weeks ago about corporations having free speech with money being free speech too. So I don't know. I mean, there's great controversy. I have my opinion, but I think we should take money out of, campaign finances, and maybe it would probably, head us in a more of a democratic direction. But that's my opinion. But yes, there should be limits. Of course, we tell students, of course there are limits to the First Amendment, because otherwise you could go out in the busiest street in town at rush hour and say, hey, we're going to assemble tonight, let's go. Because other people have rights too. But where those limits are is always where the great controversy comes in, and there's all kinds of things going on right now with social media and Facebook, tweeting. Yes?
Yeah, I'm not very prepared because I didn't know you were going to be here. But there's a couple things that have been bothering me for quite a while. Back when Bush was president, the whole, whatever you want to call it, but it was patriotic to question and, counterdict. And they've even hung effigies of Bush. And it was like, you probably shouldn't do that, but it was no big deal. It wasn't too long ago that a rodeo clown down in Texas had an Obama mask and a broom up his wahoo, and it's been going on in his family for traditions with every president there. As soon as he does it with an Obama mask, FBI show up, he's fired, big issues. Now with that said, also, you have the now protesting in front of the Secret Service is now a felony. So what do you think about that as far as handcuffing your freedom of speech? How do you get hierarchy in office to recognize your plight if you can't even protest in front of them?
Well, yeah, that's what our democracy has always been grappling with, is how to balance your rights of the individual with the rights of others, and the safety issue also, and security. So it's
holding a sign in front of a motorcade going by is worth a felony?
Well, these are the issues that our democracy deals with. These are what the bottom line is, should students have a right to talk about this in school? That's the bottom line. Should they be able to have this discussion and say, well, wait a minute, now maybe it's bad for the person in the motor, but wait a minute, maybe the person with the sign needs to have their say. These issues should be talked about in school. That's our bottom line message, yes.
What were the arguments that people had against you?
What were the arguments? Well, they said that we were communists and, threw red paint at our house and threatened to bomb our house and threatened to kill me. A lady called the house and said, I'm going to kill you, which was kind of a wake-up call. I mean, I knew about the civil rights movement. I knew about Birmingham. I knew about people being threatened and killed by the Ku Klux Klan and things, but it was the first time it really came home directly to me. They sent us things like this postcard. Very artistic, though, you must admit. So they would say that we were communists. My mom would always say, we're not communists, we're Methodists. Get that straight. But yes, the haters are out there. And some people think that if you criticize, the actions of your government, that you're unpatriotic and things like that. Yes?
So what are your opinions on public college campuses' free speech zones? Because I know here at WSU, our free speech zone is kind of like a certain area on campus, and you have to have like a 2-week waiting period, things like that. So what are your opinions about that?
Yeah, I mean, what do you think about it? Are you a student? Do you think it's unconstitutional? Mike, what do you say about it? We've got our free speech attorney right here.
Seems like an American college campus ought to be a free speech zone entirely, right?
The whole place.
That's, as Mary Beth was talking about, we've had these cases come down protecting Phelps' right to go to funerals and campaign finance. I mean, if you want to look at where the court has really cut back on First Amendment rights, I mean, look at these student cases. I mean, Mary Beth's case really was, sadly, it was the high water mark for student speech rights in this country. And ever since that time, I mean, we've cut back on the rights of kids working on student newspapers. cut back on the right of kids that just hold up a banner across the street from a high school. You know, I mean, it's we think somehow that, you know, when a kid hits 18 years old, we ship him, kick him out the door of high school, some switch gets flipped that says he's going to be, you know, he's ready for citizenship. But we're not doing a very good job. It doesn't work like that. And, you know, we're not doing a really good job of teaching kids, you know, what free speech is in this country. And, you know, some of the examples that you brought up, you know, how are we going to debate that if we're really just not preparing kids for what it is to be a citizen in a free country? And so that's a big part of our message, I think, just to kind of restore a little bit of the balance. I mean, some of these schools we go into, they come to hear Mary Beth talk, and they're told they have to walk in with their hands, you know, behind their back like this. Mary Beth loves to work the crowd before they come in, and the teachers are just kind of freaking out. I mean, because they want them, you know, silent voices and just sit single file in line. And, you know, it's a weird place to be in some of these schools. And
But
so,
it's
I think we're paying the price a little bit.
yeah, the free speech zones. I don't know if there are any precedent to say that those are unconstitutional. I was thinking there have been.
There have been. University of Maryland struck them down.
They did.
There's been a couple cases like that. Yeah.
There's
I
a
don't know if
group.
it's ever been challenged here in Washington State.
There's a group called the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, FIRE, and they deal with that quite a bit. You might want to check out their.
Yeah. Well, I know WSU has like a red rating on their website as far as free speech.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's
when
right.
it's like we tell kids in the middle schools or the high schools or anywhere, or young people, you know, our adults too. When something happens that you don't think is fair, you have two choices. You can do nothing, or you can do something. And if you want to do something, you can use your First Amendment rights. You know, you can find out what's already going on. You can write an article. You can do, you know what I mean. You can get together with others, assemble, petition, use your rights, and stand up about that. And I think it'd be a good thing to do. Yeah. We'll be interested to follow that. Thanks. What else? Yes.
You've probably heard the saying that every generation has to fight for civil liberties and First Amendment rights because it crops up all the time. I mean, we hear the court cases, and those are just the tip of the iceberg. There's more people like you when told to take off the armband, they take off the armband, or when, you know, high schools are totalitarian societies. I mean, it's
Well, I'm not sure I could generalize all high schools as being totalitarian societies, but I mean, there is that aspect in some of them.
But I would guess that there's a lot more violations of freedom of speech than there are challenges of those violations. And so how do you tell children what the limit is, and where to draw the line, where to challenge?
I think the students should have some say about where the line is in the first place. That it shouldn't just come down from above, you know, that they should have a part to play. And there are certain schools in the country that have been democracy schools or First Amendment schools, and there's a little bit of a pushback right now going on to turn towards that again instead of being so punitive and so, but No Child Left Behind has really taken a toll too because the atmosphere is so punitive and it's all about test. But that hasn't worked very well in places like China, where you have so much, emphasis on towing the line, fitting in, testing, getting good grades on testing, and then you have students who aren't creative anymore. That doesn't really work for our world today. So a lot of people are really speaking up about that, though.
As far as testing goes, one of the craziest things that I've seen on our tour here is we've gone into some schools and sometimes talked to half full auditoriums, and the teacher that invited us is very apologetic and just explaining how expected this to be full. But some of the teachers wouldn't release the kids to come down to hear Mary Beth Tinker, who's in their history books and on their exams, actually talk in person because they have a test prepared.
Yeah,
for,
test prep.
And they
overrides.
Can't let that get in the way of it. It's just like,
I know.
a little mixed up.
But kids are speaking up about that too.
So, I mean, it seems to me the basic problem with everything, everything I'm listening to, there's a basic missing ingredient in a lot of places, and that's just courage. Right? People recognize there's all these problems, and where's the courage? Where's the boldness?
Yeah, people I think also give up. They think it's hopeless, futility. It's futile to try. I think there's a lot of that too. Yeah, that's why we're out, encouraging the kids. Definitely.
Because you do find, you do find those kids that have that courage. And boy, some of the stories that we've heard, some of the kids we've met on this tour, they do give you hope. They really do give you hope. One of our messages is, that, in 1965, when Mary Beth wore her black armband to school, she did that because, an armband was one of the few speech tools available. You just didn't have that many sorts of avenues for expressing yourself. Go out and, big protest or something like that. But today, we go into, a junior high school, and I'll ask them, I say, how many of you guys have a smartphone? 75% of them will hold up their phone.
Breaking the rules.
Yeah. And it's just like, look at the power of the speech tool that you have here. And if you can just kind of wed, those powers with some sort of passion, find that issue that you really care about. Some pretty magical things can happen, and some kids are starting that. We've got a whole list of examples of kids that are doing those sorts of things.
Oh yeah,
but
I'm
I
not
think
sure.
you're right. I do think you're right that there's some reluctance. Yeah.
I'm not sure if we have our coloring
Doesn't
books,
end
but
in school.
No.
Most of the institutions we have big problems because of lack of courage.
Yeah.
If you have courage, then you might not be voted to associate professor. If you have courage, you might not be voted to full professor.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
I know.
That's really not talked about very much.
it's a huge deal. That's with adults and children and everybody. Yeah.
So don't you also have to educate the principals and the teachers too?
Yes.
My guess is principals are often a roadblock.
Some are and some are not. They're also not the, responsible for a lot of the rules in their schools, and they're under the wire too. Because, in fact, there are some principals that just signed a petition. We were at a school in New York where there was one that they had signed about evaluating teachers based on test scores. A lot of principals are standing up against that. So yes, principals they study the law and study school law, study this case, and the other 3 Supreme Court cases that came after ours that cut back on the rights.
But I think there's a lot of fear out there on the part of school officials. In fact, we actually kind of did a little informal kickoff of our Tinker tour just to see if we really wanted to do this at the Washington State the Journalism Education Conference, which was last year, and they had as their keynoter there. They had this woman. I can't remember her name. She's like 28 years old, just a social media guru, who came and was going to talk about how to use social media as a group for student journalists, state student journalists in high school. And so one of her first questions to this audience of about 1,000 high school journalists was, okay, when you guys finish writing your student newspaper article, how many of you all are tweeting out something about it? Which is, in your commercial media, that's just what you do. You have to do that if you're going to have people read it. And in this room, in this auditorium of about 1,000 kids, there were 10. There were 10 kids, and a couple of them from the same school that actually raised their hand. Because the principals, the school officials in many of these schools, they simply have banned Twitter, or they banned some of these new tools that are available. And it's like, we've got to do better. This is the world these kids are living in. And, to have this approach where you're just going to bury your head in the sand because you're either ignorant of the social media or afraid of it or whatever reason. We got to, school officials either need to, step up and teach or kind of get out of the way. Because that seems to be, that's a theme that we've seen as we've gone around the country, that there really does seem to be some real hesitancy on the part of our educators to do what we've always really depended on them to do, and that's to prepare our kids.
Yeah, a lot of kids are really speaking up about a whole transformation of schools, the curriculum, who decides what they get to study, and that it should be the students themselves. Yes?
Yeah, and I have a question. I'll change the conversation just a little bit because it seems to me the ACLU here was very important because if they didn't come, from what you told us, it would have died.
Well, there was another lawyer named William Kunstler who was also offering to take the case. So I don't know if it would have died, but yes, the ACLU was very significant, and they've been to the Supreme Court more than any organization in the United States ever because of their defense of the Bill of Rights.
And how have you been interacting with them ever since?
Ever since?
Are
I
you
didn't have
now
Now I am. I didn't for a long time. I didn't have all that much to do with them because I was in nursing school and nursing. But now I'm back in touch with them, and I'm on the board of the Washington D.C. affiliate actually, and the ACLU will be involved with us. You know, at some of our stops and various things. Yes, I'm a friend of the ACLU, and the ACLU has used this case many, many times to defend the rights of kids on all sides of the political spectrum. They just used it in New Jersey to defend a girl who was wearing a red armband to protest abortion, and she was suspended. And so the ACLU came in, and they just, you know, so they used this precedent quite a bit. They were defending rainbows in Florida. The principal outlawed all rainbows. Yes.
I wonder how much what we're talking about is a question of rights and how much of it's just a matter of good policy and common sense. Yeah. So you take something like the Bong Hits for Jesus case, right? So the court in that case said, you know, the school district can punish that speech or prohibit that speech because it's, in the school's view, it's because it was promoting drug use, right? Okay. That was an absurd position to take on the part of the principal, I think, right? But
some would say. There was a case, maybe I'll just mention, there was a case in Alaska where a boy held up a banner saying, "Bong hits for Jesus." And it went to the Supreme Court, which ruled against the boy, saying that you cannot promote illegal drugs in school, but nobody was really sure if he was promoting Jesus or drugs or what, but regardless.
It was an absurd application of the rule. But the court's decision in that case was that, look, we don't want judges second-guessing public school administrators on issues like this, right? That seems to me to be a reasonable position for the court to take. Now, the real beef I have is with the particular principal enforcing the rule in that particular case.
Yeah.
So it seems to me the appropriate remedy is as parents and as educators, we need to be involved in our public schools and help them set policy and help them understand what are the appropriate values. But this is not, it seems to me, an area where you want courts second-guessing public administrators.
I think it depends as far as where the role of the courts comes in. In teaching kids about the Constitution, we always review the three branches of government, the judicial, the legislative, and the executive. And then I ask them, you know, okay, this is a trick question. Could one of those branches do something that's against the Constitution? And a lot of the kids say, no, that couldn't happen. And then we say, well, you know, who thinks it couldn't? So and then we say, well, actually, this is where your checks and balances come in. Because kids learn that. They memorize it for tests. Yeah, checks and balances, three branches, checks. But how it actually plays out is that when one branch does something unconstitutional, which could happen, the other branch is supposed to come along and say, no, wait a minute. That's against the rules. That's against the Constitution. We're going to check you. And so, in a way, I think there is a role for the judicial branch to check even sometimes principals or school districts who could possibly do something.
I mean, look what happened in Des Moines, Iowa in 1965.
Or the Brown, how about segregated schools? I mean, principals were having. I mean, I think that's a very interesting issue. I know, and the courts just ruled about the Michigan affirmative action. That was kind of their ruling there, that the states had a right to decide for themselves. And I was reading some editorials over the weekend about that, very interesting, saying, you know, the government shouldn't get involved in these things. But then others will say, well, if the government didn't get involved in these things, we'd still have the Ku Klux Klan running Mississippi. You know, so I don't know. But it's very controversial. And again, should kids be able to talk about these things? That's the thing. Yes.
Getting back to ACLU, is there any evidence since then that they were waiting for a test case to come up?
They're always waiting for test cases. They just live on test cases. They just, you know, I'm not sure if they were just sitting around waiting for a test case about that, but there hadn't been any students' rights cases except for Barnett, which was the flag salute case in 1943, and then there was one right before that, Go Bite Us, where the Supreme Court ruled that, yes, you do have to salute this flag. And after that, there was...
The Burnside case, too.
Which one?
The Burnside case.
But that wasn't at the Supreme Court.
Not the Supreme Court, no.
There was, yeah, the Burnside case was interesting because in Mississippi in 1964, during Freedom Summer, 3 civil rights workers were killed, Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman. And so some kids wore buttons to school to protest the killings. The buttons said, "One man, one vote," SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and they were suspended. And so that case worked its way through the courts at the same time our case was going through the courts, and they won at the appeals level, and we lost at the appeals level. So that really, within weeks, these two cases had different rulings. And so it was a perfect setup for the Supreme Court, which then ruled in our ruling, they cited the Burnside case. And they said, well, yes, in Burnside we saw that the students did not substantially disrupt the school, and so the appeals court allowed the buttons. So that's what we're going to say too. So really, the ruling in the Tinker case rests very heavily on the actions of students in Mississippi during the Civil Rights Movement. Yeah, there are prints. I know, that's... Other questions, comments, controversies? Is it time to wrap it up?
If not, let me thank you all for coming out today. This is our last event of the year, so thank you for attending our events over the course of the year. Remind you that Mary Beth will be speaking tonight. She'll be giving the Friel lecture at 5 o'clock in the Gertz. The Gertzen. It's the new comm building down there, right? And it's in room 21. And that's at 5 o'clock this evening. So join me now in thanking Mary Beth for
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you.